Heya, this is Devin from Hellscube. Welcome back to Frame the Masterpieces, a series where I delve into the great designs of Hellscube's past and present, dissecting them a little bit so you can see what makes those designs work. Last time, we talked about simplicity, and how in contrast to the clever complexity of many Hells cards, simple cards have to rely on a confident, exceptional joke or through line to keep up with the rest. We did so framing the conversation with the core three: resonance, innovation, and grokkability. Today, I'll be getting a bit deeper on the topic of Hellsiness. You see, Hellsiness, elusive as ever, actually has even more to account for beyond the core three. When we talk about Hellsiness, there's some things I've mentioned repeatedly in my prior analyses. You may recall me saying the words wacky, scrappy, and irreverent. While likely not the best names for what I'll be discussing, they each represent a quality a card can have that sets your perception for the card's design overall. I think having at least one of these elements present greatly increases the odds that your card is in fact Hellsy. Today, I'll be diving into the wackiness and pure craziness of Hellsiness by discussing cards that I think cover the weird aspect of Hells. And no, this isn't Freaky Pizza's time, we'll get to you. Weirdness takes a lot of shapes, but a lot of it relies on some key traits. One of the main tenets of Hellscube is doing something wizards wouldn't do, and that often is a driving force of weirdness. Now, weirdness isn't the wild and wacky dexterity or gotcha-style challenges of the silver-bordered unsets. It's about using the elements of the game in odd ways to both maximize the resonance and innovation and harmony, something I'll label as subversion. Something that takes an expected thing and either twists or inverts it. Another key trait is something I'll call shortcutting, where you can take an action that would be quite clunky and long to write out and shift that action to something intuitive, if nothing particularly rules inherent, thus combining innovation and grokkability into something that seems incongruent with the game as it stands, but plays and reads well. Before I soliloquize further, though, let's dive into some real examples of weirdness across Hellscube. Starting us off in Hellscube 1, we have Meow. Meow is a 3/2 red human car creature that costs 2 generic and 1 red mana to cast. It has speed up for 1 red mana, meaning you can pay 1 red mana to give it a haste counter, and it also has thresholds like a leveler, except it cares about how many instances of haste that card has. With 2 to 5 instances of haste, Meow becomes a 5/4 with trample and also lots of haste. With 6+ hastes, it's a 6/5 with double strike and trample and also lots of hastes. So, just a little aside, this card predated both speed and start your engines, so in a world without those, this reads a lot more weird. Now, for resonance, I'm sure you know about Lightning McQueen and the Cars franchise, so hopefully I do not have to explain that to you. The idea, though, that accelerating alone is like leveling a car's combat capabilities, though, is wonderful. And the image, I think, does a good job of giving a sense of self-assured confidence for McQueen, a quiet whisper to himself that he is, in fact, speed. Now, let's talk about the subversion this card presents. Relying on the knowledge of levelers, this replaces the level counters with a functional counter, a haste counter. Now, in a majority of cases, multiple instances of haste don't do anything. So using them as a marker for levels is a neat way to twist the leveling mechanic, while giving you a secret level 1 of this having haste, and that carries over to its other levels. I'd say the core of the card hinges on this subversion. This weird little spin on a leveler is a, pardon the pun, vehicle for the humor. By marrying both resonance and innovation here, the card is able to really embody the concept. As far as raw innovation, using the evocative language of speeding up and haste counters is a great clue in to keep the card relatively clean. It doesn't even really need to explain what the 3 speed thresholds are, as even in a world we live in now with start your engines, the naming of the leveling mechanic clues you in that it isn't referring to player speed, but personal speed. I love to see more of these ability counter levelers, as I think the potential for subverting the level format has a lot of room, as even Wizards agrees with their latest station cards. Now, for grokkability, I touched on it earlier, but the innovation relies on what I referred to early as shortcutting. This uses the familiar structure of a level card and a evocative keyword name to tell you how the card works without reminder text describing how it works. I can see some room for misinterpretation though with the advent of start your engines and max speed, but if this was made today, it would work just as well if the thresholds were called velocity. Remixing a known, unique framing is something that tends to lead to great grokkability, leaning on the already known to guide you to the play pattern of this card. Something neat this card does that I think is understated is the shift from sorcery speed leveling to instant speed speeding up, utilizing a common slip-up on remembering how level up works in a positive way that reinforces the theming. Basically, if someone is very familiar with the rules, they'll see the reminder text doesn't specify sorcery speed and know it's an instant, while people unfamiliar with level up wouldn't think that this has a sorcery speed activation to begin with. Still, I could see a small acknowledgement of the shift between the two mechanics, just to be clear. Next up, with Hellscube 2, we're talking about Delayed Reunion. Delayed Reunion is a red sorcery that costs 1 generic and 1 red mana. Now, this card has Aftermath, meaning you can only cast it from your graveyard, exiling it afterwards. So the actual spell effect of this card is just draw a card, but you can cycle it for free by discarding another card in addition to this card. For Raw Resonance, this is a cropped image of Cathartic Reunion, which is interesting since it's actually a spin on Thrill of Possibility and Tormenting Voice. Probably unintentional, but worth noting that without Chandra, I guess the red hand churn gets downgraded in efficiency. I think the presentation is actually pretty clever, recontextualizing the art of PNLR to look a little lost in her thoughts, rather than the joy of reunion from the original art. The thought bubble fits the crunchy presentation, giving a vibe of a meme post from the 2010s, which I think assists the humor greatly. Now, the interesting thing about this card is fully in the realm of subversion, by having an actual full spell having Aftermath. This isn't the first card in Hellscube to have Aftermath on it as the full spell, but the way that this uses it utilizes an existing card style to bridge the gap of expectations. In essence, this is a side grade to Thrill of Possibility. While not fully an instant, you're basically discarding 2 cards and drawing 2 cards, equivalent advantage to Thrill of Possibility. The cost is split up at instant speed as well, allowing you some emergency churn if needed. This sort of piecemealing of effects is subversive in that it's basically a full deconstruction of these sorts of red draw spells. By recontextualizing the additional cost as a cycling cost and relegating the full effect to an Aftermath is a neat way to basically do Thrill of Possibility in a series of game actions. It also presents a lot of unique gameplay weirdness, such as giving you an option to draw a card from it after being milled or discard to another effect, and the odd split of instant speed on the first half of the card compared to the sorcery speed of the back half of the card can lead to some interesting gameplay patterns. These sorts of branching, weird gameplay options can really push a card over the threshold of hellsiness when paired with a dash of humor. Without much else to say on innovation, I'll move on to grokkability. This card is perfectly readable, though I'll note the ordering sort of punchline this card presents. Weird cards like this are often puzzles, and the storyline this gives you while reading it is an interesting one. Oh, this card is Aftermath. How do I even get it into the graveyard? Oh, wait, this looks like a play on Cathartic Reunion, but it only draws me a single card. Oh, the cycling cost is mimicking the additional cost on those spells. I get how this works. While still following the standard position templates of normal Magic, using this arrangement has its grokkable benefits on generating intrigue through its reading flow. Okay, and on to Hellscube 3 with X-Man. X-Man is a 3/3 green human mutant creature that costs 1 generic mana and 2 green mana to cast it. It has X-Man gets +X/+X, where X is X. Effects that set X also set X-Man's X, and an activated ability that costs X and 2 green mana with the resulting effect of nothing. I'm sure you can see the weirdness on this a mile away, but first let's talk resonance. This marries the concept of X cost and the X-Men, recontextualizing Wolverine and friends as creatures that care about any time you deal with an X. Just a funny little crossover here, especially with the crunched promotional image, I think from the film X2. Funnily, this grants Marvel mutants the human subtype, which actual Marvel cards don't plan on doing. Still, this card leans heavily for the humor on the concept of setting X for X-Man, which works well. Talking on innovation, this utilizes shortcutting as the backbone of the effect. Starting as a 3/3, this grows in concert with anything that explicitly sets an X value, partnering with its own blank ability to act as a self-pump effect without an end duration. Setting X as a concept is one that isn't well defined as a referenceable value in the rules, so using it here as the entire through line of the card is quite weird and makes it stand out as something uniquely Hellsy. Shortcutting like this really relies on intuitive understanding in lieu of detailed reminder text, and I think this captures everything you need to know on a surface level of playing this card with just the pithy amount of text it has. Funnily enough, the blank ability of this card is something that really helps catch the eye and fuel some weird abilities. Before I get further into that thought, though, I'll shift the focus to grok ability. The blank ability basically teaches you how to utilize the card, the big blank area cluing you in that it's quite intentional that the activated has no intended effect as its result. Additionally, all of the X's in a row in the effect would normally be clunky, but with the theming in particular, it reverses it into something quite humorous. The very simple presentation of the card belies something with a lot of templating that allows for a easy read and a guide to how to use the card in the first place, which can really help for weird effects like this. So again, with Hellscube 4, this is a very high power cube. That said, we're looking at Your Crush Waves at You. Your Crush Waves at You is a red and white Aura Saga Curse enchantment that costs 1 generic, 1 white, and 1 red mana to cast. It has Enchant Player, like most curses, and Read Into It, which means you can read the chapters of this saga in any order, then sacrifice it when you've read all the chapters. The first option is Wave Back, which causes Enchanted Player to not be able to block or cast spells this turn. The second option is They Were Probably Waving at Someone Behind Me, which creates a 2/2 white human creature token that deals 1 damage to Enchanted Player when created. And for the last option, it's They Want to Fuck Me, which adds 2 white mana and populates. So something this does quite well with Resonance is leaning fully into the main joke. The recontextualization of the art, the flavor words on each chapter, the idea that someone waving at you is a curse to dole out, and the read-ahead variant all play together harmoniously into the idea of a crush waving at you being something that weighs heavily on you. Shoutouts to the Waving at Someone Behind Me chapter, which features the shame of realizing there's a stranger they were waving at, causing you 1 point of what I can only assume is psychic or reputational damage. Alright, so on to innovation. I'm going to really focus on the Read Into It here. This flavorful spin on read ahead is both a great example of subversion and also shortcutting. This subverts the skimming a story aspect of read ahead by reinforcing the lingering and scattered anxiety of the theme. The perspective character wishes they could skip all the way to the end of this excruciating moment. It really does embody the aspect of the reading too deep into a simple little action. The shortcutting also relies on the similarity to read ahead to let you know while reading is just the keyword that it affects how the chapters progress. The idea of using chapters like checkboxes is great, and lets you use discrete blocks for the normal saga chapters as easily denotable spaces. I could see Read Into It getting a lot more use, though in small quantities. If it had more than 3 chapters, the tracking would be a bit hard to maintain. So this is definitely well suited for 2 to 3 chapter sagas. These twists on a black border idea tend to be the bread and butter of making something quite healthy. Finally, on to grokability, the cool thing this does is transform the chapter indicators into discrete markers while not insinuating an order. I can almost picture these as little clickable checkboxes to say I've done these chapters already, or on a physical card, a space I can place dice or a counter to indicate I've done that chapter already. Just a nice little touch to make grokking the free ordering a little better. I also like the addition of the curse subtype, as anything with a curse subtype makes it clearer that it's supposed to go on your opponent rather than you, clarifying purpose easily with just a line on the type bar. Okay, and on to Hellscube 6, another reminder that HC6 is a commander cube and has to account for the little oddities of the format. With that out of the way, I'll be showing you the weirdest card on today's list, Wiimote. Wiimote is a white artifact that costs 1 white mana with flash, evoke for 3 generic and 1 white mana, and quite the odd rules box. Its main abilities are, as Wiimote enters a public zone, choose another permanent or card in that zone. If you move Wiimote, the chosen card moves with it. The card can enter your hand, library, graveyard, or sideboard, even if you don't own it. It enters the battlefield or stack under its owner's control. Let's just jump into the resonance here first. The fantasy of this card is that you are either pointing the Wiimote at an object and moving it, or using the other card as a Wii nunchuck and thus clipping the two together. Either route is phenomenal at capturing the idea, with the mechanics equally pulling the weight of making the game actions feel kinetic, just like the Wii itself. Motion controls in Magic terms is interesting space to try and make real, and the rounded edges of the Wiimote forming the natural edges of the card is a great use of space. Perhaps I'm just missing too many brain cells, but I can't fathom myself why the Hour of Devastation set symbol was there, and would love to know in the comments if you have an idea. I'm sure it's great. Now, on to the innovation. The entire concept itself is very innovative. A do-nothing object that relies on an exterior outlet or the alternate evoke cost to turn it into a Swiss Army knife of interactions. This can recur things to your board or hand, this can kidnap an opponent's permanence, and more. I would be here all day talking about the weird little things this card can do. This type of design really excels in Commander, where a utility effect like this can rely on a specific commander to repeatedly get value out of it, or can just be a 4-mana instant speed spot removal. In a 1v1, this could be pretty stifling, but the interesting pattern of moving this around and dragging cards with it suits a longer game format like Commander. Something else this card does well is shortcutting, where the language of the Wiimote movement utilizes the motion controls theming as a pair with the idea of moving a card, meaning moving zones. It doesn't even explicitly say it, but the structure of the effects and the reminder text inform you how this card intends to function and how it navigates that space, with just minor limitations laid out before you, rather than a prescriptive play pattern in the reminder text. Finally, for grokkability, this does much the same thing that Delayed Reunion did earlier, where the layout of the ability sets up a puzzle for you to how to figure out as a player, revealing the situation the further you read the card. Again, a normal spot for Evoke, but the structure lends itself to teaching you how to use it just by laying it out a certain way. I think the reminder text does a great job of covering the expected weirdness this card presents, and that is a lot of weirdness, in a way that represents most play scenarios this card runs into. That said, weirdness like this is hard to encapsulate with just card text, so don't necessarily be afraid to design wacky cards like this and feel the need to explain every little interaction it could have. As long as the reminder text and rules text gives you a good idea of the general play pattern of something like this, covering more niche interactions can happen in concert with judges and those in the community that assist with rulings. After all, Hellscube has over 5,800 cards now, so expecting you to be able to proof your card against every other weird card is a fool's errand. That said, always good to examine your own card's play pattern and see if you can assist the player or drafter in knowing how to use it well. Okay, next up we'll be diving back into HCC. As a reminder, these are mostly cut commanders from Hellscube 6, so aren't actually in a main cube. This time we'll be looking at the Jigsaw Killer. The Jigsaw Killer is a legendary 2/1 black shapeshifter creature that costs 2 black mana to cast. It has plot twist. Whenever the Jigsaw Killer dies, target creature becomes the Jigsaw Killer. Its name is the Jigsaw Killer, replaces this card as your commander, shares commander damage, and gains this ability. It also has Reboot. You may cast this card from your graveyard. If you do, it enters with a finality counter and becomes the Jigsaw Killer. The resonance here is pretty clearly framed around 80s and 90s slasher movies, especially in the realm of Scream or Friday the 13th, where the identity of the iconic killer changes between films. The Jigsaw Killer as a name even feels kind of magic-y, a semi-subtle riff off of Saw's Jigsaw villain, in the same vein as Meat Hook Massacre. The flavor words do a great job of kind of shamelessly showing its references, fitting quite well with the vibe of slasher film marketing. The saw blade surrounding the card is fun as well, looking like it's right out of a direct-to-DVD slasher film case. By the way, in case you're wondering, all of the art in this is Magic card art, even the one on the bottom right. As for innovation, this does some very neat stuff with the keyword action of becoming card name. Taking on even the weirdness of a commander designation is a cool thing to transfer, and the neat reclaiming the title aspect from Reboot means it's not just a one-off gimmick of being able to use someone else's commander as yours. Something cool about this innovation is that it's a pretty nice standard for what shortcutting in Hell's cards means. It sets up a unique action, reminder texting it, and using it as a storytelling device that illustrates the fantasy of the card while still keeping the idea in line mechanically. The survivor becoming the killer, only to have the real killer return from the grave and reclaim its title, is a hard concept to illustrate normally, but by bundling the act of becoming the Jigsaw Killer together, it lends to a really clean narrative that still supports the gameplay. Now, with Grockability, I won't say this card is doing anything special, but the framing of the mana cost by the name still retains that sense of place that Magic cards need to be readable still. While not in the top right like usual costs, the way the name arches over it means you're certainly not missing it. Over to Hellscube 7, we have Gathering. Gathering is an instant that costs 2 generic, 1 white, 1 blue, 1 purple, 1 black, 1 red, and 1 green mana to cast. It has the effect of cast target public zone. Each non-land card, no mana costs. Public zones include the battlefield, graveyard, stack, exile, command, and ante. This card has the unique distinction of being quite the celebration of Hellscube as a whole. If you're a big Hells fan, try and zoom in on the art and spot all the Hellscube references. I find a new one each time. The resonance here is great. This is probably one of the splashiest effects you can ask for, and making this cost 6 different colors of mana is the appropriate way to enshrine such a cool little effect, really making it feel like an encapsulation of playing Hellscube. Big stupid cost, big interesting effect. Shoutouts to the confident and subtle flavor text joke of just making this The Gathering from hit game Magic The Gathering without insinuating that it's a legendary instant or something by the name. With innovation, this one little line of rules text has such big implications. At any point in the game, this can steal a game-winning spell from the stack, gain control of all of an opponent's non-land permanents, resurrect a whole graveyard, or even take everyone's bench commanders. Something big like this echoes a card like Clone Legion, just a fun, splashy, game-winning spell that benefits from so many different angles to win from. Even if an opponent exiles your entire graveyard and board, you can just come right back with a surprise Gathering. The shortcutting here is phenomenal. Casting a zone being just shorthand for casting each eligible card from that zone is great. Excluding lands by not saying play also makes it not a griefing tool for the battlefield mode. It makes easy to read and understand at a base level, leading to the Grockability. This card gives you all the minor restrictions up front without spelling out how this card can win the game from you. The easy-to-read nature of the card's instructions give a great opportunity to ponder the best moment to use the card. Very few cards can sustain this low amount of rules text, and I think the way this card presents just how splashy it is perfect. Okay, and on to a new side project we haven't discussed yet, Hellstart. Hellstart was a relatively uncurated side project about mimicking Jumpstart. There were a bunch of pack themes, and people designed headliner cards that helmed the packs for people to build around. Today, we'll be talking about a card inside the Contraptions pack, Cranky Kong. Cranky Kong is a legendary 1/1 Black Elder Ape Sprocket creature that costs 1 black mana to cast with, whenever Cranky Kong becomes tapped, crank everything on him. Okay, so points straight up top in Resonance having Cranky Kong be all about cranking. In line with my talk last time on simplicity, this one confident little joke really sells the card. The innocuous, almost candid game screenshot really gives off some irreverent, funny vibes. This nearly blank text box sells the idea hard that this ape is named Cranky Kong because he cranks his contraptions. Bonus for insider DK knowledge that Cranky himself has quite the scientific background despite his earlier career as a construction site kidnapper. Now, for innovation, this relies a lot on knowing how sprockets and contraptions work. When you're in a game involving contraptions, typically there's sort of an extra deck, and you have something called sprockets, 3 little holding zones for contraptions to be put in. Every turn, you move a marker in order to go through your sprockets, 1 turn and 1 sprocket at a time, and when you move that marker to the sprocket, it cranks all those contraptions. Contraptions typically have effects tied to cranking. So, in essence, every turn you move to a different sprocket and activate all of the cranking abilities of contraptions on that sprocket. In normal ungameplay, where the gameplay stuff comes from, you usually have to assemble contraptions via keyword actions onto the sprockets. And piling your contraptions on a sprocket might sound good, but it means they only crank and give you a benefit every 3 turns or so. Additionally, when contraptions are destroyed, they are sent to the scrap yard, basically a separate little pile for dead contraptions. In Hellscube, older cards used something called refit, which allowed you to flashback an artifact onto a sprocket instead of the battlefield, with an effect that happens both when tapped or cranked. Cranky takes this to a whole other level by being a sprocket himself, a 4th sprocket in essence. To give him extra utility as a 1-mana 1/1, he is able to crank all his contraptions separate from the sprocket tracking mechanic, essentially adding yet another way to get good value from any contraptions also in your contraptions pack. Making creatures into odd gameplay objects is not new in Hellscube, but as far as I can see, this is the only base sprocket card. I still find it amazing that this deep into Hellscube, new messed up ways to make game markers into cards you can cast still keep cropping up. This novel weirdness is the hellsiness that many designers strive to find. Lastly, with crockability, you might be saying, well, how am I supposed to know how a niche unset mechanic works? This is a unique quirk of Hellstart. By bundling a bunch of similar mechanics into a single pack that is guaranteed to be played with each other, you can offload a bit of the explanation to the whole of the pack. You don't have to look up a new niche mechanic for each card. Instead, you can just look it up one niche mechanic for the whole pack. Otherwise, in a main cube, I would definitely say this needs some more reminder text somewhere, but it's a great fit for the cube it's in. Finally, we're at the currently in progress cube, Hellscube 8. The last card from these main cubes we'll be talking about is Circle of Life. Circle of Life is a green sorcery that costs 2 generic and 2 green mana to cast with arrange all creatures in a circle, regardless of controller. Each creature deals damage equal to its power to the next creature clockwise. This card should be pretty obvious on the base resonance here, being a Lion King reference, but the clever imagery of arranging the cards into a circle of violence reflects the idea of predation and death that the concept of Circle of Life is alluding to, appearing a bit like a food chain. Making this have a Golgari watermark and flavor text is also oddly inspired, seeing as that's Golgari's whole thing. Some additional points in my eyes for successfully making a green-feeling board wipe that feels green on its own. Finally, I'm sure you've noticed this by now, but the card is literally a circle, and such a fun and fitting way to display this effect. Now, for innovation, this card utilizes shortcutting to really truncate the normally quite long way to write out an effect like this. Typically, this would be written out like Parade is on Starlight Spectacular, for instance, but using the imagery of a circle really communicates the way the game action plays out with far less wording. Without this flavorful phrasing, this effect would be a lot harder to write out in full, likely making the circle joke a bit harder to pull off. I'll also say the actual shape of the card is pretty innovative. As I've said before, this card isn't necessarily doing anything new to Hellscube, but this is definitely one of the cleanest executions that ties it together with the theming. Lastly, for grokkability, this card does a bit of a subtle thing that aids in the readability. Centering. The type line, the name, and mana cost, along with the rules box, are all centered, putting the reading focus of the card directly in the center. This gives a great sense of direction while reading the card, as even without the typical layout of a magic rectangle, the way the card keeps your eyes aligned with all of the relevant info drastically improves the reading experience while accentuating the shape of the card itself. With abnormally shaped cards like this, experimenting and accommodating for the best read is key in making sure that players don't get too turned around just trying to parse your card. Okay, and that's all the main cubes. As always, I'll be talking about the process of making a card that actually got accepted into the cube, this time with a card I made for Hellscube 7, Koth, Forgotten in a Cave. So this card was an interesting one to make. Hellscube 7 was a bit of a pile cube in that the archetypes were not strictly enforced, but instead encouraged through other people's designs. One of the loose archetypes was hand size matters for Izzet, and I was shooting to make a card that fits the archetype well on the red side. To start, Koth, Forgotten in a Cave is a legendary 5/4 human warrior creature that costs 2 generic and 2 red to cast. It has Mountain Walk, and basic land cards in your hand have Cycling for 1 red. And whenever Koth deals combat damage, each player draws that many cards from the Koth Zone. The Koth Zone is a library containing 100 Mountain number 245 from Scars of Mirrodin. So to start my journey, I thought, well, what's a good chaff card to fill your hand with in red? Then the next thought was, oh, mountains, easy. The challenge was finding something interesting with a card that makes a bunch of mountains to fill your hand. I wanted to play into the aggression of red, so generating mountains via violence felt necessary. All this led me to the mountain guy himself, Koth. So to me, Koth is it's really tragic in Magic writing because he's a planeswalker that never gets to leave Mirrodin, like, ever, because he's so tied to the Phyrexian story. He also is supposedly best buds with Elspeth, but after the conclusion of March of the Machines, he just kind of quietly lives on Jalfir and loses his spark. Like, he's chronically forgotten. So that actually led me to the card Forgotten Cave. By combining Koth with the Forgotten Cave, I was able to find a good use for all those mountains in your hand, and I waffled a bit on everyone getting mountains. Ultimately, it was probably better and more interesting in draft to give everyone the mountains, since this card having Mountain Walk means it would be a bit risky for your opponents to even utilize the free cards they were getting, while you were easily cycling away the basics in favor of something that you can actually use a little better. And I basically gave him Mountain Walk because he was Koth. No other reason, really. For the art, I really wanted the idea of Koth just being really sad at being forgotten, so I leaned towards a simple little thought bubble of the last time Koth had anything happy happen to him, and a little flavor text blurb just referencing how sad it would be if he just got a Despark creature card later of him just bumming around. Finally, I thought I was done. But then I realized with some feedback that it just wasn't Hellsy. It was probably a bit funny, but the mechanics were just like an alchemy card, which, cool and all, but not something someone would look at and go, oh, yeah, that's Hellsy. So I went back to the drawing board, trying to think of big sweeping changes to make it weird. One of the things I thought was the main culprit of it not being Hellsy enough, then I was like, well, Koth was a planeswalker. What if he had his own library and it was just full of mountains? Then I took it a step further and made it a specific mountain, a very meh-looking Scars of Mirrodin mountain, to further sell how forgotten in a rock he was. Funnily enough, this does come with some Hellsy complications. You see, you lose when you draw from an empty library, even Koth's. So if all the mountains get exhausted from his library and he deals more combat damage, anyone drawing from that empty library loses the game. Weird, and usually unlikely, seeing as a 5/4 with Mountain Walk would be swinging in 4 to 5 times for lethal, and that's only about 40 to 50 mountains in a 1v1, not accounting for blocks. Funny thing to try and do in a 4-player Hellsmander game with Platinum Sable, though. If you do it, let me know. So yeah, this little change from just conjuring mountains to drawing them from a Despark Planeswalker's library helped it really fall in line with Hellsiness. This is one of those flavorful shortcuttings that doesn't necessarily make the card function all that differently, but gives flavor and texture to the card in a way that feels irreverent of Wizard's normal design. Creating a whole new Koth zone just to draw mountains from is definitely weird, and the little quirks of it being a library just adds that sprinkle of mechanical weirdness and subversion that scratches that Hellsy itch. By the way, if you're unfamiliar with the art I used, that is indeed Koth's arena avatar in front of a Forgotten Cave art. A subtle little Forgotten Cave reference with the build your own Forgotten Cave aspect. Jamming together two well-known magic arts tends to work better than these two fairly niche sources, but in general, the more recognizably magic a joke is, the easier it is for people to both grok what the card does by association and get onboarded to the joke easier. And that's it. Thanks for joining me today on this talk on Hellsy Weirdness and how to see cards doing it well enough to get accepted. Hopefully, I'll see your cards in the submissions channel of the Hellscube Discord.